What is Crackalack and Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale coming at you without my fantabulous co-host Adam Frommel. I am, however, as always, super pleased and excited and just generally over the moon to have good friend and colleague Grant Hughes from Bleacher Report back on the podcast. Follow him on Twitter at GT_Hughes if you are not already. Grant, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Dan. Thank you for having me back. We've been pretty regular, I think, so far this season. I'm into that.
This is I think this is the third time you've been on in season. That's not even including like the off season. That wasn't really an off season, and then I'm sure you were on during the bubble. The timeline sort of melded together, but I'm pretty sure you've been on 3 times this regular season. And considering we're only like 20 games deep for the most part, it's like once every 6 or 7 games.
Yeah, it feels like this whole season's weird, but it feels like it's been going on forever, but we're basically at the quarter point, which is kind of crazy to think about.
So we're going to get in depth into the MVP ladder as it stands right now, maybe with some forward-looking stuff caked in. I did not ask you about this before, but I wanted your opinion on how you feel about the league going ahead with an actual All-Star weekend after having to postpone so many games so far. And I know the latest report was they've had 0 coronavirus tests like during the last batch of testing, but I honestly would like to know like how they looked at what's transpired so far this season and were like, you know what, having an actual All-Star game is a good idea.
Yeah, no, I feel like I'm not a good person to ask about that because my interest in the All-Star game is probably like it's low generally, but it's definitely way too low for the job that I do. Like I just sort of don't care. And I wonder who this is for. Like so what I mean is like, I guess there must be a contingent of people out there that really care and like want to watch the All-Star game. I don't know what the ratings are like, but I'm not one of them. But like the main thing is, isn't time precious? Like because of all those postponements, like don't we need that time to make games up? Wasn't that why they built in that break to begin with? Like I don't know. It seems wild to me, but clearly they think that it's going to be a moneymaker. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see if there are going to be people that decide not to play in it. I know there's something to that. Yeah. Maybe the players are safer or less likely to contract COVID if they're operating within the NBA's protocols as opposed to living their normal lives. But I just wonder if there are going to be players that are like, screw this. When I'm on the road, I can't do anything. I'm going to take my however long the break it ends up being. And then I wonder what happens, like if there are guys that have contract incentives for making the All-Star game. It was easier when you were just going to get elected and then those incentives hit and there was no game. But now there's a game. If you bow out, does that not count?
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of back tightness and like sore whatever that's going to crop up, I would suspect. There might be a lot of alternates named, actually, if they're going to try to play.
Yeah, you need to just have like people in waiting in case they have to enter the league's health and safety protocols during All-Star. I guess I'm not surprised that they're having it, but it's just like, can we try and figure out a way to survive the season instead of having this totally unnecessary, doesn't even matter towards the standings event? But like you said, I guess maybe they view it as a moneymaker.
That's the cynic in me. That's where I go.
The MVP ladder, though, we both talked about how difficult this was to sort of parse, and I feel like it's you can always do quarterly check-ins on whatever you really want, but with the MVP it feels like it's almost a little bit early. But even that said, this race is shaping up to the point where I feel like there are probably at least 4 guys, maybe 5, who have genuine, concrete, distinct win-it-all cases, and I feel like that's very rare. We normally, by the quarter pole of the season, I would think have it narrowed down to at least 3. And then sometimes it becomes like this matter of head-to-head. And then there's times like last year where I think, even though people tried to eventually make the argument for LeBron, it was just always known that Giannis was going to win it. It doesn't feel like that's the case this year.
No, I think it's complicated further by the fact that several of the guys that preseason you would have pegged as having a really good chance, including the favorite, I guess there's no reason to pretend like we don't know we're talking about Luka Doncic. Like he's not in any, he's nowhere near serious consideration for me. And so that means there's a vacancy up towards the top just because you got to have, a handful of serious contenders, and he vacated a spot. Giannis, I think everyone started the year kind of thinking he could do the exact same thing again. There's no way in hell he's going to win 3 MVPs in a row, but he's kind of done everyone a favor by having a slightly worse year for a team that, they're net. I think the Bucks lead the league in net rating, but they're 12-8, and everybody's fixated on how the defense isn't great. And so he took that out of our hands too. So there's another opening up there to sort of have to figure out how to fill. So that's only added to how tricky this one is, I think.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on the Luka Doncic stuff. The Mavericks, and there's the other element of that. If I was making lists of who I think should win, I'm probably not paying as much attention to team record. Luka Doncic still wouldn't win it in my book, but where it does seem like, and historically, it's just, we have that Russell Westbrook season the year after KD left, but it just doesn't go to someone who plays for a team that doesn't rank in the top 2 or 3 of the conference. Like, it doesn't happen. But this season's also weird because everything's impacted by COVID, since some of these teams have just dealt with all this personnel turnover. I mean, Dallas has been impacted by it. Philly's been impacted by it. I mean, every team's just been impacted by it. So it's kind of like this element of a free-for-all, which I think makes for an interesting debate. The dilemma, obviously, that this like real-world shit is happening that's, adversely impacting this. But this was, I think you're someone that does this too. You ache and agonize over how to build these things, but this year was just, it's so much harder than usual. And so I'm curious how you want to start, where you land. You want to work our way from the top to the bottom? I know you separated them into tiers, so do you want to start with the top tier?
Yeah, I think we should start with the top tier. And mine has 3 guys in it. I would be really surprised if your top tier was not the same. But the top tier is LeBron, Joel Embiid, and Nikola Jokic. And if I had to, I guess let's just do it this way. LeBron, I have LeBron as the MVP so far. And I fully recognize that there's a great statistical case for the other 2 guys I mentioned that might be better than his. But it's not like, he's at 25, about 8 and 8 or 7 and 7, 7.7 and 7.5 to be direct, like not close to career highs in any of those for him. 31.6 usage, 59.7 true shooting. You go through the catch-alls. He's 4th in Raptor. He's 2nd in RPM. He's plus 14 per 100 when he's on the floor per cleaning the glass. 4th in win share. Like, so his cases, like those are all, you've got a lot to stand on there. Just for me, like, I want to oversimplify this. He's the best player on what I think is the best team. And as I thought about how to consider like what is valuable, like we do it every year, what does valuable mean? And I kind of came back to like, it's a 2-pronged kind of analysis. And the first is, what is the difference between having this guy and not having him? Like, how big is that gap? And then you sort of weigh that, or you try to balance that with the idea of, if when you have this guy, you are at the apex, which I think the Lakers are. So if you have LeBron, you are the title favorite because you have LeBron. And for all other things being equal, that's what you have. If you don't have him, obviously you're not. And you drop down to however good you are with Anthony Davis as your best player, which is not bad. But that's different. There are other players that have higher on-off, net rating splits. There are other guys that have better catch-all metrics. But because LeBron has numbers that at least warrant consideration, and you add to the fact that like what he makes you by being on your team, which we're seeing with the Lakers, I think they're the best team in the league. They lose the minutes when he is not on the floor. Like, that's insane. He's the only guy on the team that has a negative net rating. They play to a negative net rating when he's off. It's just that compelling for me. And I will not deny that there is some element of this should not be a consideration, but there's some element of, we all know he's the guy you want if you're trying to win a title. I still think that's true. So that's like 2% of my analysis, but that's the whole package. That's just kind of where I'm at on him leading my list.
So my top 3 were the same. I had LeBron, Joel Embiid, and Nikola Jokic. I did not have LeBron as number 1. And there's like, look, he could, I think it goes without saying at this point, he could win the award every single year. And I don't think that you could knock it. There's still something to me where it's like, if Anthony Davis, and you look at the minutes when they play with Anthony Davis and without LeBron, and they're getting blasted by like 7 points per 100 possessions. It's just not, it's not pretty. But to me, there's still something, if we want to believe that Anthony Davis is his top 5, 7 player, top 10, whatever, and I believe that he is, that does sort of take away a little bit from LeBron's case, because I do try and look at what the team is without them. And you would think that it's easier for the Lakers to be okay without LeBron. Then my winner right now would be Joel Embiid. And there's the element of, this season, because of the way their roster makes so much more sense, but they're once again losing the minutes that he doesn't play and Ben Simmons does. They're minus 13.4 points per 100 possessions. So it's even worse than when Davis plays without LeBron. And that's not the perfect way to measure it, but there's also the element of, okay, they're 1-4 when Joel Embiid doesn't play, and they're 14-2 when he does. And he has one of the highest, among players who have logged at least 240 minutes. He has like one of the 10 highest net rating swings, plus 20.6. They're 14.5 points better per 100 possessions on offense with him, 6.1 points better on defense. I know people have talked a lot about his offense and his decision making. The numbers there are just, they're wild. 28.3 points, 57.5% shooting inside the arc, 40.4% shooting on moderate, okay volume from three. Those would be career highs. Shooting a career high 84% at the foul line while getting there over 11 times per game, which I'm pretty sure might be like a league record or something. I would need to check that there. So he's just been an overall monster, and I think if there's someone who's going to challenge Miles Turner for Defensive Player of the Year, and I've already been lampooned for not predicting, if I had to pick right now who it is, I think it would be Miles Turner. It would be Embiid or Davis for me. And Davis is a whole other argument because I don't think what he does will ever show up in the numbers. But you just look at how much less often, not that teams get to the rim when Embiid is on the court, but how much less they're taking those, floater range shots, because he is such a deterrent that these teams, they'll either bail out way sooner on their drives or they just won't drive at all. And I think it hasn't necessarily been every game, but it feels like he's been even more aggressive in his pick and roll coverages where he's coming out a little bit more. Maybe that's a Doc Rivers sort of tweak. So I've looked at his offensive efficiency. You still want, his assist to turnover ratio to be better. Right now it's 2.8 assists on 3.1 turnovers per game. So that's no bueno. I still just, as someone who is dominant in basically every facet of the game right now, where LeBron is just, even though he's played better defense since arriving on the Lakers, just never going to be at that level defensively, someone who's so important on both ends of the court for Philly right now, it's tough for me to pick against. And as a snapshot, it was an easier decision for me. Not that I didn't agonize over it, but if we're looking at predictions, that's where it gets hard, because it's like, okay, well, Nikola Jokic and LeBron are going to miss X games, fewer than 10 probably. Embiid's already got 5 misses under his belt through the quarter mark. Yeah, is he going to end up missing 15, 20 games or something? It gets harder to justify that. But right now, for me, I think he's been, I would say I'm like 67 to 71% certain he's been my MVP.
I don't want to argue against that, because he was second on my list, and like as just looking, trying to build the case for him, I can't think of a guy that has been more like the Embiid experience has been so fun this year, because I really feel like he is single-handedly subverting like the last 6 or 7 years of all the trends we thought were taking the league over. So like he's a dominant post-up player. He's by far 1.09 points per play on post-ups, which is like not a,
it's like a mediocre offense, which is fine.
That's a mediocre offense on a really inefficient play type, which is just by far the best rate of anybody that posts up often in the league. And 1.21 in isolation, which is in the 86th percentile, which is like, isolation's bad. We don't do that anymore. No, he's really good at that. So you can just, it's really a throwback of like, give the big guy the ball and your team is good, which is like really fun to me. I don't know because there's not a lot of other Embiids out there to make this a trend, which kind of makes it even cooler. And the next guy we'll talk about, I think, is even, a more extreme example of that, where there just isn't, we don't need to worry about centers like these two guys, Jokic and Embiid, taking over the league, because there just aren't more of them. But yeah, Embiid has been phenomenal. I love how just purely dominant he's been. He's felt like the most dominant player in the league, which maybe isn't the most valuable necessarily, but it goes a long way towards that. So I do not have a strong pushback against Embiid, obviously, because he's second on my ballot. Do you want to talk? So Jokic is 3 for you. He's 3 for me. Was there any thought of him compared to Embiid being higher, or?
Yeah. He's tough because I don't think the Nuggets have, I guess, started to get better. But you look at that. I mean, like that does color the rankings. I try not to look at them, and I don't think when you look at Denver right now has climbed their way to fourth, and so they've had their defensive problems. They've gotten a little bit better there, and I don't know to what extent he's an issue for their defense. Like he has really good hands. His steal rate is always just absurdly high for a big guy, and his defensive rebounding matters because it ends possessions. And then just the raw numbers for him, they jump off the page and smack you in the face and punch you in the teeth and spit in your eye, basically. He's averaging 26.8 points, 11.8 rebounds, 8.6 assists, and 1.8 steals. He's shooting 62.3% on threes. Normally his three-point percentage kind of hits an uptick later in the season. He's hitting 38.4% of them now. He is the engine that makes the Denver Nuggets offense go. I mean, they have Jamal Murray, and there's certainly lineups that you can cobble together that will survive without him in theory, but he's just so valuable to them. When you look at relative to Embiid, does it matter that Embiid is a two-way player? And I know that people are going to argue that Nikola Jokic is fine to like a net even on defense, and let's say that's what it is. I don't think that you can call Nikola Jokic a two-way player. Like, it's just not at that point yet. And he's not like this super staunch rim protector. There are going to be matchups where he just struggles defensively. And he's matchup proof because he's just so damn valuable on the offensive end. And you can certainly be so good on offense that it doesn't matter. And I think there have been seasons where LeBron has proven that, and Jokic has proven that this season. And if you're going to be even close to average or like only a little bit below average on defense, that matters. But I'm just looking at Embiid and dominating at both ends and where he improves and uplifts his team's ratings on both ends of the floor so starkly. It was tough for me to put Jokic over that, even though I think when you look at his numbers and knowing that we should value offense, like Jokic is always going to have more of an influence over his team's offense because of what he does as a passer. And he's basically matching Joel Embiid's scoring while, being top 5 or top 8. What is he now in assists per game? I have to double check that. And so there's certainly something to that. And I think his case there's a chance that this is one of those cases where it's I don't want to say a slower burn, but more of a gradual one, where if we fast forward to the halfway point, maybe Embiid has missed some games, Jokic has continued playing at this rate, the Nuggets are still in the top 4 of the West like they are now. So maybe time actually helps him, but I didn't consider it as heavily, I would say, as Jokic's just raw numbers suggest.
I think so. To kind of illustrate that point, I agree. Once I kind of looked at the whole package, I thought I was going to really agonize over the Embiid Jokic thing, and it just kind of became clear to me that he should have been third. But I have LeBron first, so it's a little different than yours. But like, if you look at the things that these catch-all metrics are all flawed. So we all agree that if you're first in PER, it doesn't mean you're the best player in the league. But Jokic is first in PER, and he's third in Raptor. He's 8th in RPM. He's first in Basketball Reference's win shares. All these things weight box score stuff really heavily, and so obviously his ridiculous conventional averages, points, rebounds, assists really help him there. But he's really conspicuous in this regard, and he's very different from almost all the other guys we're going to talk about in that on cleaning the glass, the Nuggets are 0.07 per 100 better when he plays than when he sits, which is like negligible. And that is all tied to the defensive issues because the offense is like 17 per 100 better when he's on the floor, which shows you that the defense is that much worse, basically. I agree. Like, I don't think he's necessarily a bad defender, or at least I'm up for kind of like a debate as to whether he's fine. But like, look,
it's worth noting he has the worst defensive rating swing on the Nuggets.
Yeah.
So it's it's not, I'm not trying to blame him in full, but that stuff has to matter too.
If you're trying to distinguish between him and Embiid, like that's the giant, blinking red light. Like that has to be considered, and that has to put him below him, I think.
Right. And I don't know how much. What do you think is the realistic like chances of him catching? Well, I guess LeBron for you and Embiid for me.
Well, I mean, to actually win the award, the Nuggets would have to finish like second or third in the West and blah, blah, blah. But if we're talking about, does he deserve to be ahead of either of those two guys? I mean, a lot of it might honestly be out of his hands because the Nuggets would just have to defend a lot better to get some of those on-off numbers, to be at least competitive with what Embiid's are and with what LeBron's are, and that's going to be a tough hill to climb because we are a quarter of the way into the season. I think a big game can swing a lot of this. Like shout out Fred VanVleet, who was like fifth in some catch-all metric I saw after last night.
I tried to check to see if him and his wife had adopted a child before the game or something, just to make sure that it wasn't related to him adding to his family.
I didn't even think about that. That has to be why. No, but I think it's gonna be hard. Well, it could just be simple that Embiid misses a bunch of games and then boom, he's ahead of him. Like that's the cop out answer. But other than that, Jokic can't do more statistically on an individual basis.
Right, and I don't want to penalize him. I think when you get this close, though, and that's what separated, and that's why he was third, because I did consider putting him above LeBron James. Mm-hmm. But when you get to this level, I do kind of look at the minutes that are spent without him on the court, and the Nuggets are winning the minutes he's not on the court. They're plus 4.5 points per 100 possessions, an offense in the 46th percentile and a defense in the 86th percentile. The offense was actually, that just speaks to how good they are on offense in general, because they're like almost league average without him, and then he somehow still blows it up when he's on the court. And so like that mattered a little bit to me, where it's like if you took Jokic off the Nuggets, would they be the best of these three teams if you removed those stars? I think there's probably a case that the Lakers would still be better than these Nuggets, but you look at Denver and it's like, well, they would still have Michael Porter Jr., assuming he didn't catch COVID for like the 8th time, and there's Jamal Murray. It's tough. I think Philly would very clearly be the worst to me, and maybe that says more about Ben Simmons than it does, whatever. And again, I don't want to penalize these guys for minutes they're not spending on the court, but when the margins are this close, that is stuff that I do look at.
No, I agree. I do think that, the numbers clearly say that the Nuggets would be the best, the least negatively affected by Jokic not being.
But I'm just like thinking about it in theory, where it's like Anthony Davis and even Ben Simmons, like they're just more consistent players in what they do best than Jamal Murray, where it's like, does he ever put together like a consistent 6 weeks of basketball?
Yeah. I would say that if Jokic were not on the Nuggets, I think they would look the most fundamentally different, because like he just is what they do, and maybe that offensively anyway, I think he limits what they do defensively, but maybe that's like a component of value if we're going to really get into the weeds of like, how much do you define the way that your team succeeds? Like Jokic is offensively like how they operate, and it works really well. I don't know how you quantify that, but I think that's a point in his favor, at least in some regard.
It's gonna be great when we fast forward like towards the end of the season and both of us pick him as the MVP.
Stranger thing.
Hardwood Knocks listeners, I hope you're all sitting down, because we have to tell you something monumental. We love sports betting, and whether you've been betting for a while or you're thinking about getting started, we want to let you know about a great resource for sports bettors, the Action Network. The Action Network is where sports fans go to bet smarter and experience real financial gains. In fact, their Action Network app was recently named the best app in sports betting. And with an Action Network Pro subscription, you can unlock the very best of the app. When you sign up for an Action Network Pro subscription, 1, you can access the Pro Report, which includes expert projections for every game. 2, you can see money and bet percentages on every game, so you can see the teams professional gamblers are betting on. 3, you can take advantage of pro systems, which match winning historical betting trends with the latest games and lines. And 4, you can track every bet you make and get alerts in real time. So if you're looking to bet smarter, an Action Network Pro subscription is the best way to get started. And for a limited time, our listeners can receive 50% off an annual Pro subscription. Just go to actionnetwork.com now and receive 50% off an annual subscription when you use the promo code KNOX. This offer won't last, so go to actionnetwork.com to sign up for a Pro subscription and use promo code KNOX, KNOCKS, to receive 50% off. And start betting smarter today.
Have happened.
We both had one and one player only in tier 2. Who was it?
It's Kawhi Leonard, and I would be curious as to why you have him there, because my reasoning is just like, of the next chunk of guys, he just crushed them all in a lot of statistical stuff that was important to me, and then also the not statistical aspects of just like, well, this is a weakness-free two-way wing that's been Finals MVP twice, and he's playing better this year in a lot of areas than he ever has. So it's just like, I don't know. He's just, and I think part of it too for me is an acknowledgement that he's obviously, to me, the guy most likely to jump into that first tier as long as he plays enough. Because he already, I think, you have to trim off some of the, add to some of the minute requirements when you're sorting stats to kind of, for example, plus 23.5 per 100 is right. His net rating swing, which is the highest in the league among guys with 500 minutes. There's a lot of guys with significantly more minutes than that, but I mean that's a decent number. It's just, it does point to the fact that his workload is just generally, other than Embiid, going to be less than the other major candidates.
Yeah, he's also flirting with 50, 40, 90 shooting at this point. He's at 39.8% from three, and he's hitting the other marks, free throws 91.5 and 50.7 overall. 54.6% on twos, which is just ridiculous because he doesn't get to the rim. Like, that's the thing about the Clippers as a whole. They don't really get to the rim that much, and yet they're still just like this uber efficient offense. I thought about whether he should be in tier one. As well, and there's a case for him to be there too, just because we're talking about how we measure Embiid's impact as this two-way player. Is there, is there a better two-way player in the league than Kawhi Leonard? And no, there is not at this point. So he was sort of tough to leave out there. But when you're looking at how the Clippers are playing overall, where it's this comes again to the talent that he has around him. Yeah, he's really uplifting them. But if you pluck him off the Clippers, what do they sort of look like? And there's a chance of the four teams that we're talking about, I would argue that the Clippers probably look just the best in general, even though Kawhi Leonard has the league's largest net rating swing.
That's the wildest part about all this, is because this team, theoretically, Paul George, who had a million points tonight, had a great game, just slots into that role and they should be fine. And it's not like they're a shallow team, like Marcus Morris hasn't played that well, but they got all these other creators. They've got they have so much talent, and yet you take them off the floor and they're just so much worse. That has to be a little bit of an anomaly, but it just jumps right off the page to me.
Right, and they're losing the minutes that they've staggered Paul George and Kawhi Leonard a little bit less than I thought Ty Lue would this year, and they're losing those minutes overall. Their defense ranks in the 38th percentile with an offense that's slightly above average when Paul George plays without Kawhi Leonard. And so maybe we're just sort of, totally misreading this situation here. Is there a level of then fatigue because it's Kawhi's doing it again, but he's more efficient on offense this year than he was last year. And so as I even look at this, I'm wondering does having him in that, second tier, is that unfair? And then the other part is I do feel like there's a switch for him defensively, and also where he's not necessarily, in certain matchups, you're going to see him guard a bunch of Kevin Durant, or you're going to see him guard a ton of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But because you have Paul George, and even because you have Marcus Morris, and there's some Patrick Beverley there, the defensive workload that he shoulders, I feel really isn't the same. And that's not to say he's dropped off. I just feel if he was sort of making the difference, I guess, that Joel Embiid was, or if he was covering, different types of assignments. And if you go and look at the matchup data, he's really kind of all over the place when you're looking at he's defended De'Aaron Fox a bunch this year too when you're looking at partial possession. So maybe that's even a little bit unfair, but it does feel in the regular season there's very much a defensive switch where it's some games I watch of what I've seen the Clippers and I don't always feel him on defense, where it's RJ Barrett actually shot pretty well against him in the game that they played the Knicks. But then there are games where it's he just decided to shut so and so down.
I think it's fair to say that he looks marginally less athletic this year than he has, even last year. And I think he's compensated for that by he's so strong. I forget who did he dunk on the left baseline the other night where he just threw him out of the play, and it might have been Aaron Gordon. I don't know, not important. He just is ripping the ball away from guys still. He still has the hands, but he doesn't. I think, and really this has been a trend for the last couple of years, I think people have been pointing out that he's not, Spurs Kawhi in terms of just you're not allowed to dribble near him or you lose the ball. But yeah, he's offensively as efficient as he's ever been. As I think about it more, I don't know why he's not in the top tier. I think I think maybe it's because there is that sense that he does do some switch flipping. And maybe that's not fair because all these guys do it, but it does
LeBron
feel like
is the king of it. So
the king of it. I mean, he's the great. Yeah, he's the best player of all time when the switch is not flipped on. Like he still is the best guy out there.
Well, I think, look, let's look at the real thing. And also, I said he was getting to the rim less. He's actually getting to the rim at the same rate he is last year, which is to say 23%, which is to say tying the second lowest mark of his career. He's also shooting 78% at the rim, which is just, and his ability to draw fouls, like shooting fouls without getting to the rim a ton, it remains divine. But I think if we, like, there's no need to sugarcoat it. It's because to this point, he has the best number 2 of anyone here, maybe the second best, depending on what you think of Anthony Davis this season. And so he has one of the 2 best number 2s of this 4-player group, where Jamal Murray or Ben Simmons isn't going to touch the way that Paul George has been playing for most of this year. He's had like some cold 3-point shooting lately. And maybe it just feels like we're more in tune to that selective dominance, and that stands out more than it would for LeBron at points. And look, the Lakers have been on defense this year. I think they still have the league's best defense when you're looking at points allowed per 100 possessions. They do. But there's been visibly a switch there. And are we just numb to it? And we're with Kawhi, it feels like the past 2, maybe 3 seasons, that's something that's sort of novel. I don't know, but I'm like you. The more I think about it, I'm wondering if like this needs to be like a combined tier now, where he is with Jokic, Embiid, and LeBron.
Yeah, like if you had said you had Kawhi second, I think I don't know that I could have mustered like any indignation that you would dare to put him up there. But I think like if he ended up winning it this year, it would in a lot of ways be less surprising to me than Jokic or Embiid, which we're not talking about that. We're talking about, or at least I'm thinking of it in terms of what's happened so far. But yeah, I think that just speaks to, it's like tier 1.5 with an asterisk for some reason. Basically.
Yeah, the more we talk about it, the more I want to be like trendy and try and be ahead of the curve and just pick him. He's even averaging a career high 5.4 assists per game. Maybe that drops off as the year goes on, like it did last year. But still, just he's been. I think those are the 4. Where I think if you picked anybody else right now, I mean, we'll get into that. I'd be like, yeah. But if you could pick, I think realistically, any one of these 4, and I don't know why anybody would push back.
Right, I agree, and I think to piggyback on that, the next tier down is just like a bunch of guys that I don't think realistically have any chance to win it, but sort of belong in the conversation. It's like when you're in an argument with someone, you say, well, it's just he's in the conversation. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean doesn't have a distinction. But
of note, by the way, since we're moving on from the first /1.5 tier, whatever we want to call it, Basketball Reference's MVP award tracker overwhelmingly has Jokic as the favorite, 45.8% probability. Can you guess who's in second and what the probability is?
What was Jokic's probability? 48 something?
45.8.
45.8? I don't know. I'm going to assume Leonard is second, and I have no idea. What is it?
Joel Embiid is second at 19.3.
Wow. They just love the triple-double. It's the triple-double, and the team's going to be good, and yeah, I don't know. It's like if Russell Westbrook was – actually, the Nuggets record might not be that much better than what the Thunder's was when Russ won it.
As of right now, 60 winning percentage. I think it's got to be higher than that. I can check really quick, but yeah. So it's the numbers, like the way they calculate it. It's based off like past results, but still, that's an airtight hold.
Yeah, that's a big one. I'd be curious to see what it was like last year at the quarter poll. Was Giannis like 95% since he had such crazy box score numbers?
I'm pretty sure he was. He also had like a strangle on it, if I remember correctly. Let's see the Thunder though. Their winning percentage was 57.3, so the Nuggets at 60. That's not that much higher than MVP Russ this season.
Yeah, that could get it done. I think. So we just touched on Giannis. He's in my third tier of like 1, 2, 3 of like 4 guys. Is he in that tier for you, like that next chunk down, or do you have him further down?
So my next tier actually only has 2 players, and Giannis is not one of them.
All right. Well, who are give me the first one in this next tier.
I have Kevin Durant, and there was, when I was doing this exercise for Bleacher Report, I actually had him in the top 3 at one point. He has missed some time since then, but his numbers are still just overall ridiculous. there's the element of, look, I think what takes away from other players voting, and you look at LeBron and Kawhi specifically, Paul George and Anthony Davis, their teammates, both of them might finish in the top 10 of MVP voting. And so I think there's a level of like that kind of has to take away from their value case, because whether or not what the numbers say on the floor, that, you know, the on-off splits, all that shit definitely matters. But at the same time, if you're saying they have one of the 10 most valuable players in the league as teammates, that drags away from their case. Kevin Durant now has two of those guys, neither of whom actually ranks in the top 10, really, but what they're all doing best is just like there's an overlap in their value, and Kevin Durant is clearly the best of them, and his numbers this season. And look, this can't matter, but it has to be mentioned. He's coming back from an Achilles injury and not playing basketball for 18 months, and he's averaging 30.8 points per game, second in the league. He's averaging 5.2 assists. He is shooting 57% on twos and 45.2% from three. He's just an absolute offensive monster. I just look, it's just like I feel like such an a-hole talking about it in this context, but it's like, yeah, he makes the Nets, 13 points better per 100 possessions when he's on the floor. That's their net rating swing. 9.4 on offense, and they're actually better on defense. But what does it mean when you also have James Harden and Kyrie Irving there? Can he realistically beat out any of the guys in front of him? And yeah, maybe one or two, but how do you argue right now that Kevin Durant is more valuable to the Nets than Joel Embiid is to the Sixers or Nikola Jokic is to the Nuggets?
It's kind of the story of his career, because he's almost always played with other really great players. And that, I mean, it was a source of frustration for him in Golden State, because I think there were moments where everyone would agree, and the 2018 finals were an example where it was like he's the best player in the world. There's not a question. But there were also stretches in that same season where everybody would kind of, or a lot of Warriors fans that watch the team closely would still say, well, it's just Steph being out there that makes all this possible. Steph is still the most important player. And, there was a dynamic of that with Russ and actually even Harden a little bit before. There's that same dynamic now with Harden again and with Kyrie. Like, I think he's one of the hardest candidates to evaluate. But think about this. Like, I think it's a consensus opinion that Durant is one of the greatest players ever, perhaps the greatest pure scorer ever, like full stop. He's never averaged more points per 36 than he's averaging right now. He's at 30 per 36. He's never even gotten to 29 before. 29.9 in 13-14, but still, point stands. He is almost at a career high in field goal percentage overall at 53.3, and he's never shot better than the 45.2 he's hitting from three. Like, this is arguably one of the two or three best. I was going to make this point for Steph in a little while. This is arguably one of the two or three best seasons we've ever seen from one of the best players in the world, one of the best players of all time. And like, he's in the third tier of our MVP conversation for this season. Like, I don't know, does that just mean the league is way better than it's ever been, or are we blowing it by not having him up there with Kawhi? I don't know. I think you point to the defense as a knock. He's a selective defender. He can make an impact, but that's just never been a big part.
The Nets are switching so much now, like it's tough to read his value, and so like he's not really, they're not throwing him at like. Yeah, they played I think it was the Celtics game. I saw him defend a lot of Jason Tatum. And so there will be instances of that, but it's just like his assignments are all over the place where it's like, he's going to defend like a lot of Rui Hachimura or someone as well too. And so it's just tough and he's not going to make like these huge plays off the ball. He has held up fairly well as when he's like been having to contest shots at the rim, but he's not contesting a ton of shots at the rim, under 3 per game. So like, you're contesting about, only slightly more shots at the rim than a Kevin Huerter per game, since I looked up the Kevins on the data when I was saying that. So, it's tough, and that's why this race is so difficult, because actually if I said, oh, you can't pick anyone else other than those 4, and you mentioned Steph, I mentioned Dame, and I'm like, if you came to me and told me that you wanted to vote Dame for MVP, I probably wouldn't argue with you that much.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I've just already contradicted myself, because I think I just made the case that Durant belongs up in that upper tier. I don't know.
I'm trying to feel like look, if we're trying to get predictive, there's how many games will he miss? He already missed some time when he was, in the league's health and safety protocols. And then we've seen him play. I think he's played 1 back-to-back this year so far, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe there's a chance that he plays more, but I would argue probably against it because now you have Kyrie and James Harden there. There's a tug of war there because these players shouldn't be penalized for who their teammates are. At the same time, it's also like, and maybe it's even more impressive that he's able to distinguish himself despite having these teammates. So if you want to, do we move him up now do we have tier 2 as Kawhi and KD, and now we're getting into our tier 3 guys? Is that how we're going to do this midstream of the podcast?
Feels right. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah. All right. So tier 1, we have LeBron, Jokic, and Embiid. Tier 2, or 1.5, whatever you want to call it, is Kevin Durant and Kawhi. And so who's in your tier 3?
So we moved Durant out of it. He moved up. I have Steph, Dame, and I have Giannis in tier 3. And I feel the least comfortable with Giannis, but
which is wild. It's
Giannis.
like he's averaging 27, 11, and 6, basically, or whatever it is.
I know. Like, that's the thing, is he's a little worse than last year when he was just clearly the most statistically productive and deserved MVP, all that stuff. Maybe not in your top 5 of guys you want to be your best player to win a playoff series, but that's not the question. Like, so he's just barely, really, I think the ways that he has disappointed, I guess is the word I'd use this year, are like conspicuous because everybody's fixated on the free throw shooting. Everybody's fixated on, he's not dunking nearly as much. Some of that's just the way the Bucks are playing has changed. He's not doing the things the same way that he used to. And, it's easy to look at him and say like, oh, he's a little bit diminished. But diminished is still, just like you said, I mean, his numbers are ridiculous. He's the best player on a team that has the best net rating in the league right now. He's, the case is there. But I just don't think there's really an argument for him to move up. Even though we've said that about a couple guys and gone back on that, he's at the bottom of this tier for me. And it's not really that, difficult for me to put him down there.
Yeah, so in the spirit of this, I have him in tier 4 then to kind of keep in theme with what I was doing. Okay. And Dame and Steph, I'll say, are in my tier 3. Dame was right there with Kevin Durant. Again, if you wanted to pick Dame, I'm sure we'll get into him too. With Giannis, here's the thing that's like sort of weird for me. One, he has a lower usage rate in the clutch than Chris Middleton right now. And there's the solvability to his game still exists. There's, some of it might be the Bucks' fault at this point. And this isn't like when you look at their usage rates from last season in the clutch, Milwaukee was definitely not spreading around the shots as much, but Giannis still had a 42.3 usage rate in crunch time last year, compared to 33.1 for Chris Middleton. And this year, just to show you like how much more dispersed it is for them, at least so far, and they haven't necessarily played. They've played. I think the team has played in 7 crunch time appearances, so it's not like this huge sample size. 26.7 usage. That's a huge dip, and Chris Middleton's at 28.6 to lead the league. The difference really here is that you also have Drew Holiday, who's at 18.4, and that's just a level of player that you didn't have there last year because Eric Bledsoe is in theory a liability in those situations. But the solvability to his game, I think, is sort of doing him in for me this season, and maybe that's not fair because if the rest of the field wasn't so convincing, I wouldn't be looking at that as much, and I certainly wasn't looking at it last season, but even the context of how you view him changes because I kind of thought, him taking 3-pointers and these pull-up jumpers, like that in itself, the volume is a weapon. I call it the Marcus Smart effect. But the difference with Marcus Smart is that he's gotten to a point where there will be seasons where he actually shoots well from 3. And last year he shot 40% on pull-up threes. Like Giannis just hasn't gotten to that point. And so at some time, is it like, okay, do we need him? Like, can you just ban him from taking those pull-up 3-pointers? Can you ban him from taking more mid-range jumpers? Like, should you focus on posting him up more? And then that's all compounded by the fact of I still don't know that he's figured out how to play when there's someone in the dunker spot. Like that's going to help with Milwaukee's offensive rebounding, and it's different and makes them there's more variance in their attack, but it doesn't look like he's fully comfortable with it either. And in a field this deep, I think every little bit has to matter there. So he's just, the lack of growth, I guess, even if you want to pepper in the fact that he is dealing with a different way that the Bucks are playing. And, maybe they could use him a little bit better more. Like, what if Giannis was just, you don't want to say this strictly, but what if Giannis was replaced So, some of those pull-up threes or those mid-range looks with possessions where he's, the roll man more. What can we do with, can his post game be a little bit better? I think this season he's averaging 0.79 points per possession on post-ups, only about 11% of his plays, but that's 11% of his plays. It's 2.8 possessions per game. So the word I use again is just solvability. He still feels if he went into the postseason that he can be solved. And while this is a regular season award, there's that granular level at least has to matter in this discussion. And look, he set the bar high because of what he's done the past 2 seasons. There's voter fatigue is definitely unfair, but also it's like if you haven't really changed and there are instances of your game where you've just slightly regressed, even a little bit, and yes, you have new teammates and Drew Holiday, yada, 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 the Bucks are playing differently, that stuff has to matter too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to just how quickly, a perception of a player can change, because I think as recently as, even last year you could have said, but certainly in the couple of years before that, so much of what made Giannis, obviously, he was obviously productive, but what made him so interesting was, like, here's this 7-foot guy that can bring the ball coast to coast and Euro step around everybody and just do stuff physically that you've never seen. So you assume that, well, of course he's going to learn how to shoot threes. Of course he's going to add all these wrinkles to his game. And really what happened instead is he just sort of got very good at the couple of things that he did well because he was just a physical marvel and is a physical marvel. But I think, so looking at him now today, I think it's unrealistic to expect he's just going to round out completely. I think this is the player that he is. And I think ultimately what that probably means is that he isn't, and you pointed to the usage rate stats, like he isn't the guy that you give the ball to and say, like, take us home. I think he's, like you alluded to also, he's the guy that sets the screen. I think someone else has to be.
Which they don't do, by the way. The frequency with which he's used as the roll man this year is actually down from last year, which I would argue makes zero sense.
They're contrary to how the Bucks have operated generally, they are figuring this out, because I think Zach Lowe said today that there was a point in mid-January where Giannis set like 36 ball screens, which is the most he'd set ever. And this is just within the last 2 weeks. So Their numbers are down on the year, but they are using him increasingly as a ball screener, which is like, thank you. I think that's the best way to sort of actualize what he can do. But if that's your role, that doesn't really sound MVP-ish to me, because that means somebody else is the one making the decisions. It's like Draymond Green was the role guy, and some of the best iterations of the Warriors, you would never call him the MVP. It's like just a different position to be in. So great player.
The free throw shooting is unforgivable. It's
a problem.
Yeah,
it's a problem. I think there's been some pushback on like real stat nerd Twitter about how, like, well, an individual player's free throw shooting isn't gets really overblown because it is so obvious, and if it's a superstar like this, you can really fixate on it, but it doesn't ultimately affect a team's ceiling. And to me, it's like bullshit, because at the end of games, like, you're gonna foul this guy because otherwise he'll dunk on you, and then he's shooting 59%. Like, of course that matters, especially if you're a team that wants to go where the Bucks want to go. We're getting way out of the MVP discussion, but like, you cannot seriously tell me that a guy that is a huge factor on a would-be contender shooting 59% from the foul line at high volume, you can't tell me that's not a problem. Like, that's ridiculous.
I get it in the sense of, like, so if he shot 70% on free throws instead of 59.3, it's a difference of 10 or 11 points,
right,
that he would have scored this year. But if you view it in the context of, later in the games, you're giving teams like sort of a point of weakness to focus on, where it's like, no, you shouldn't. Yeah, you give Giannis the ball if you have to, but at the same time, it's like you'd rather have Drew Holiday, you'd rather have Chris Middleton have it. So I get, like, it's not a ton of points when you're talking about, can he at least get to 70%? So it's not like a huge form of that. But at the same time, and I'm trying to look at what he's shooting 60% on free throws in the clutch this season. And again, not a huge sample size. It's 3 of 5. Okay, that's a terrible, but it's just like, that's another thing to harp on. And again, we have to split hairs when we're having this discussion, but I think he set the bar so high, and now he's sort of maybe leveled off, if we want to say that he hasn't taken a step back. And it's like, okay, how much longer can we overlook the missing parts of his game and the fact that he's sort of like trying to, I don't know, like force his way through them? Where should he still be taking over 4 3-point attempts per game if he's shooting under 30% on them? How much value does that add to the defense? And I can't remember which podcast I was listening to. Maybe it was, I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was Jared Dubin was on it. But anyway, mentioned how at this point, Giannis needs to put together like 2 years of good 3-point shooting for defenses to actually guard him consistently for it. You'll always get the occasional someone's going to overreact, or if he gets really hot one night, maybe they play him a little bit tighter. But most of these people are going to look at it as if Giannis goes, say, 4 of 8 from 3, 5 of 9, whatever it is, on a given night and they lose, and if it's in a playoff series, they're going to say, you know what? He beat us tonight and there was nothing that we could do about it. I wish I could remember the podcast I heard that on, so I apologize if I missourced it.
Can we talk about Steph? Because he's actually at the top of this tier. I kind of buried the lead on that one.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
All right, so I made a lot of these same points for Durant, but it's basically, I mean, there's a strong case that like this is his best non-unanimous MVP season, because that one's just untouchable. But he's basically replicating his 2018-19 numbers, which was not an MVP season, but he was still phenomenal. He was 5th in MVP voting that year. And like, just to think about, we talked about the talent of teammates in a lot of other ways, for everybody, but like to be as good as he was basically a couple of years ago when he had Durant, when he had a healthy Klay Thompson, when he had Draymond Green, 2 years ago, which is a big deal based on how he's progressed on the aging curve, to do that with like ridiculously inferior talent that fits so much worse and makes it so much harder on him. You can tell the homer in me is coming out right now because I'm passionate about this. But like with like the level of attention he gets, like possession to possession, I think is greater than any single player in the league. Because if you're playing the Warriors, no one else is really going to hurt you in a significant way, other than my hero and man crush Andrew Wiggins that I'm deeply in love with now. I'm not going to apologize, but like.
Playing well still. I mentioned that we last recorded that you're not really being seduced by early season Andrew Wiggins, but he's still playing pretty well.
Andrew Wiggins is objectively a good basketball player.
Andrew Wiggins right now is objectively not a bad basketball player.
No, he's objectively good. Look at all those blocks, Dan. He's like
the defense. Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
He's shooting over 40% from 3. Where's Andrew? Should Andrew Wiggins be in this tier? Do we need to redo this? No, but so yeah, degree of difficulty for Steph is off the charts, and he's basically having a season that a couple years ago warranted 5th place in the MVP voting. So it hasn't even felt like he's had that good a season. He's had moments, but he's had bad games where he's getting boxed and won, and like it's just been impossible for him to move, get clean looks. He's playing in these lineups. I mean, Wiseman's hurt now, but like Kelly Oubre has had one of the worst shooting starts to a season ever. He literally runs into Steph when Steph's trying to shoot relocation threes. Oubre is literally in the way of someone who's
visibly mad all the time when that happens.
You know how hard it is to make Steph Curry visibly mad?
Well,
it's like impossible.
It feels like it's pretty easy this season.
It is now because guys are running into his spots when he's like, I just ran 6 miles at top speed to try to get open. And everyone on the floor knows this is where I'm going except you, Kelly, and you happen to be here. And so Wiseman is not providing spacing. Draymond is a total zero as a spacer. It's just like, it's wild to me that he's been this productive under these circumstances. So, if we're going to hold like really good teammates against some of these guys, whether that's fair or not, I think we have to acknowledge that Steph is working with just really tough circumstances and having a great year.
Yeah, and look, the Warriors' offense, when Steph is off the court, ranks in the 1st percentile.
Is that good or is that bad?
It's awesome. It is the Kelly Oubre Jr. of offensive ratings. This is like sort of an unrelated question, but I think it builds up his case. Draymond Green is officially an offensive liability, right? Just because the thing that I found interesting, I'd watched a couple consecutive Warriors games, and I was actually surprised that they weren't running Draymond Green without Stephen Curry more, because it just felt like, yeah, I know you have, a Wiggins, or you have, now Wiseman's coming off the bench too, if he's, once he's healthy. So there's like different variations that you can run out, but Draymond has logged 983 possessions, and I brought this up to Adam the other day on the podcast. Can you guess how many have come without Steph on the court?
Oh, it's got to be like under 25.
13.
He's never out there by himself.
And at that point, if you're not going to play him, I don't know, maybe they're just thinking like, hey, our bench minutes are going to be like a disaster. Or our Stephen Curry minutes are non-Stephen Curry minutes are going to be a disaster no matter what. We want to make sure we have our two best guys on the floor as much as possible. But like the theory of Draymond Green's playmaking and his decision making in general going downhill is that he should be able to anchor those units. But the fact that he can't, it builds up Stephen Curry's, or the fact that maybe the Warriors think that he can't. I think that builds up Steph's MVP case because they're not playing Draymond Green independent of him right now, and I don't think that says anything about Steph really as much as it does about Draymond there. So the case writes itself for him. I will say the only reason I didn't pick him over Damian Lillard, and you could also argue like Dame had CJ for so long this season, and CJ was just been like absolutely bonkers this year.
Yeah.
Is it feels like Steph has lower lows on certain nights, if that makes any sense. And like I looked at it, and there are just like more nights for Stephen Curry where it's like, oh, did he shoot like 4 of like 16 or not even that, like a 7 of 19 or whatever it is. And so part of that might just be that the shot selection is higher variance, but also I'm looking at Damian Lillard and just he continues to get better every single year. This season, by the way, and this probably comes as a surprise to absolutely no one, but Damian Lillard leads the league in shots made outside 27 feet. Stephen Curry is second. 1 and 2 right there. And they're both shooting what would be above the league average from 3 on those looks, which is just stupid. That's just stupid. But Damian Lillard is finishing better at the rim. He is averaging 7.3 assists per game, which would be the second highest of his career. It's down a tick from last year, but he's also averaging fewer minutes. When you look at the per 36 minutes, they're a lot closer to what he was doing last season. And so the fact that he's able to do that, he's still someone for the types of shots he takes and the traffic that he needs to navigate. I'm always just amazed that he doesn't have a turnover rate like in the teens, and that's still at 11.5 for him there. His usage rate is 30.8, which is tied for is the third highest of his career right now. He, like I mentioned, he's finishing better around the rim, not at career high levels, but just better. His in-between game has just been nuts. He's shooting 52.6% on long twos, which he doesn't take all that often, but they're still counting for almost 10% of his shots. 42.9% between 10 and 16 feet, and 46.7%, which would be another career high from that floater range between 3 and 10. This is I feel like he's never been more of an every level scorer right now. And then when you're looking at, we're talking about net rating swings throughout this entire podcast. Look, he's up there. 21.1 points. The Blazers are 21.1 points better per 100 possessions with him on the court. 20.8 of those are on the offensive end. They're still slightly better with him on defense on the court this season. So all that stuff matters. And you look at just the type of shots that him being on the floor, to me, it's like the level of Steph now. We're just having him on the court opens all these opportunities for other teammates. The Blazers their effective field goal percentage is 7 points better when he's on the court, which is one of the highest marks in the league. It's actually the 5th highest among anyone who's logged at least 240 minutes. So, and Steph, by the way, is 7th. So you talk about guys who are like neck and neck. They're both just right there. The separation for me was just, Damian Lillard has better teammates, although there have been a ton of injuries there. Yusuf Nurkic, CJ McCollum's out now. They haven't had Zach Collins, although I don't know how much that matters. But Steph just seems to have like these lower lows. And maybe that's a byproduct of the teammates that he's playing with. But that was ultimately sort of they're in the same tier, but ranking Dame ahead of Steph was my decision there. And I guess it probably matters that as of right now, the Blazers are a tick better overall than the Warriors.
Yeah, I think they share in common if we're talking about like their actual chances to win, both of these teams, I think, are going to struggle to kind of hang around the good side of 500 all year. And so that's just not going to be good enough. I don't know if that's fair, but that's just where they are. The other thing about Dame, he's the best pick and roll ball handler in the league. 1.17 points per play. And that's a lot of that's because he's just going to come around the screen that gets set high and shoot it from 30. But, the pick and roll is still kind of a pretty important facet of an NBA offense. And if you have the guy that is the absolute best at that in terms of high volume pick and roll ball handlers, that's a pretty good start to having a good team. So.
That's another area where Steph doesn't run them nearly as much, but 1.17 points per possession for Damian Lillard as a pick and roll ball handler. Steph is 1.14. They're just
Right.
so close in every offensive category.
They're like, you can't avoid the comparisons. I mean, they're right there. I don't have a problem.
Look,
with
Lillard has where Steph has like that streaky gene where there's like at any minute you could envision him going off for like 40 points in a span of 12 minutes or whatever it is. Damian Lillard has like that clutch gene. We saw it against the Bulls the other night. We scored 6 points in under 10 seconds. And like, there's no way to quantify that outside of his crunch time shooting. But whenever he puts it up I haven't had that feeling with Steph since his unanimous MVP season where I thought every shot was going in. Now it just feels like there's more higher variance to his game. With Damian Lillard, I'm still at that point where I expect, particularly down the stretch of close games, just all the shots to go in. I tried not to let that weigh how I'm, or at least factor into how I'm determining this, but there is that.
No, I agree. He definitely has I push back a little bit on, I think Steph still has these stretches where it's just like a joke, some of the shots he makes in succession, but Dame, like, there's no denying Dame is just the ultimate closer.
I think
right
Steph
now.
Still has that level of he could be the best player in the NBA for a given season or a half season or something and still has that in him, where I don't know that Dame has that level because Stephen Curry's shot making and ball handling is just on this like completely other level.
It is utterly undiminished. Like his ability, I mean, his in between game and his handle and traffic and stuff is, I think it's better than it's ever been. Partly because it's had to be because there's 3 guys on him all the time.
Does he have an option?
No. So that's the end of my third tier. And then my fourth tier is almost just a bunch of guys that like I would have felt bad not mentioning, but that I think right now are not even remotely serious considerations for the award. Do you have another chunk of guys that are not just sort of honorable mention status?
Just Emmanuel quickly, and that's basically it.
No. Are we giving MVPs for having the best floater in the world? Because he's running away with it.
I mean, first of all, that might be Rashawn Holmes who has the best floater. Or maybe,
guards. So, we need to do an all NBA floater team. That would be a good idea.
I do have like another tier of guys.
Okay.
I'm assuming that you have AD and Paul George in yours.
Yes.
Did you also have Jason Tatum there?
I have Jaylen Brown / Jason Tatum because I refuse to choose between the two of them.
Differentiating them is so tough, and I think Jaylen Brown's improvement has kind of overshadowed the season that Jason Tatum is having.
I agree.
And I don't know if this is a spicy take, but I think Jason Tatum might be the best off-ball defender in the league.
Ooh, interesting. Tell me more.
I don't know if that is, if we want to first of all, they're just smarter basketball minds than me who could probably disagree with that. But there is just, no, he's not always going to, I don't think you want to have him on someone to be like, hey, you need to go shut down this guy. But he can just bust up plays from everywhere. And he's so smart about using space and angles. And it always just feels like you can't throw an entry pass or a cross-court pass and have it go like uncontested or even be completed without like some sort of duress after it leaves your hands when he's on the court. And so I feel like he's so smart there. And I've watched more of the Celtics lately than I had at the beginning of the year, and I just marvel at what he's able to do as an off-ball defender. And I don't know if it's to the level of where you would call him like, how do you differentiate between there's easy on-ball, off-ball, but then like how does a good team defender sort of factor into that? And the fact that he's not going to, protect the rim a ton, but he also can break up these plays from behind. I think I might be there though where he is, and anyone who's listening who wants to call me out and be like, no, you're an asshole, this is just not true. Does Anthony Davis count as the best off-ball defender in the NBA just because he's all over the place? But I think if we're talking wings maybe, or wings and guards, or just perimeter-based players, I think he might right now be my best off-ball defender in the NBA. Does Giannis sort of fall into that category too? Who knows?
Well, league leader in deflections per game, Larry Nance Jr. is very upset at you right now. No, I don't think that's crazy. I guess like who used to hold that title? Is it
Giannis? I feel like people just because he was the defensive player of the year, they kind of assume that he's like, oh, he's just shut down. But he's more of, I guess, a rim protector than what a traditional wing would be. But the Bucks still aren't like, hey, you need to guard this person. Like they sort of want to have him on a lesser player so that he can bust up plays all over the place. And so maybe I'm going to say Jason Tatum is, I'll cop out and say like top 2 or 3 in the best off-ball defenders then. So I just don't even, do we even talk about that category? Is that even a category that's discussed?
It should be. Because every year we're kind of trying to figure out how the Celtics punch above their weight defensively with Daniel Tice at center last year. And, how are they doing this? And every Brad Stevens team always does that. Well, it's like maybe because, the harder to see, the less visible elements, like off ball defense. Like maybe they have a bunch of guys that are good at that. I don't know. Maybe you're onto something.
But I guess the moral of the story was Jason Tatum is just Jaylen Brown has been so good this year and just so much better. Where I think it's probably not a hot take to say that he's been a top 25 guy this year, top 20, whatever you want to say. It's sort of overshadowing that. Hey, Jason Tatum is averaging 26.8 points, 3.6 assists, shooting 43.1% on threes, 51% on twos, which would be a career high if it holds. He's just having a fantastic year, and like Jaylen Brown is going to play both sides of the floor. I don't know that he could ever work his way into like the top of this discussion, because maybe he and Jaylen Brown are on like such. And look, at any given point, you could probably argue that like they have 3 guys who could be on equal footing, where not a lot of teams have that. You have the Nets. If Kemba ever hits, he has not this season. Mm-hmm. So I think it's fair to pair them.
Well, I mean, I did that with 3 guys that are in this like gotta mention them tier on the Jazz, because you can't pick a Jazz MVP. You probably would have to pick Mike Conley right now, which I was just not prepared to do. So I just kind of lumped Gobert, Mitchell, even though Mitchell hasn't played that well, and Conley together as like we have to mention them because Utah's so good, and it's partly because of them. I don't know. That's just me being indecisive. I think I would pick
Gobert just because of still just like the transcendental impact he has for them defensively. Yeah. And Mitchell, I don't know that you could pick him just because until that Jazz winning streak, not
so good.
Yeah. Did you have anybody else listed?
I got a bunch more names. Bradley Beal leads the league in scoring. My only note for him is points, ! Losses, ! I just feel like if you lead the league in scoring efficiently, you got to get some shine.
I thought about that, but the Wizards have the worst record in the league.
But you're not an idiot, so you didn't say it on a podcast? Yeah, all right.
I have one that might be idiotic, and the on-off splits will never, ever support it. I'm actually wondering if you could guess it.
An MVP candidate, fringy candidate that has bad on-off splits?
Correct.
Wow. I don't know. Who's my Bam?
No, that would probably be a good one though. Does he have bad on-off splits? I haven't actually looked.
I don't know. He's just on my list, and I wanted to mention him.
I had Chris Paul.
Okay, so I had him in this honorable mention, and then I quickly deleted him because I was just like, this is a legacy pick. He hasn't been that good for the Suns, but he's won him a couple games in the clutch recently. So maybe
he is shooting 13 of 22 from mid-range in crunch time, and because they've dealt with their guard rotation is, I would say it's not the deepest, but they've gotten good minutes this year from Campaign, which helps. And by the way, that's 59.1% if anyone wanted to know like what he's shooting from mid-range in the clutch, which is basically right in line with what he shot from mid-range in the clutch last year. But I'm also just like sort of looking, they've needed him more than I think that even they would have anticipated, because Devin Booker missed some time. They've had other guys who are out. Dario Saric has been in health and safety protocols. And then just because of the nature of the guard rotation and how much they're really staggering guys, he's played a ton of minutes lately. Like overall on the season, he's at 32.9, which is probably more than you want him at this stage, because Chris Paul is 35 years old. But if
it's his most since 14-15.
Right. And in his last 10 games specifically, there's been 2 overtime games in this, I believe. He's at like 35 minutes per game. And if you even sort of isolate that down, if I went last 7, I bet you that number shoots up too. Mm-hmm. He's at 35.2 over the last 7. So the fact that they've needed him to play so much, and then just what he's been able to do for them in crunch time, the on-off splits don't support it. Their starting lineup, pretty much regardless of the version they've used, whether it's with Jay Crowder or Cam Johnson, the numbers are not great there. I think the team in general is starting to stabilize, but Chris Paul has done such a good job of keeping them in games and then navigating crunch time, even with, the other night when they beat the Mavericks in crunch time, like he found Devin Booker, that he hit that would end up being the go-ahead winning 3. I believe that was him. And then just the big shots he's hit in general. I mentioned him. I don't know that he has a path to working his way into like one of our main tiers, and maybe I'm factoring in the age and playing time too much here, But the clutch performance on its own is just like, oh, he's not shooting well from three during those minutes, but he's still just money. And he can still, he doesn't get to the rim a ton, but he's still able to just cook bigs whenever they switch on to him.
Oh my God. It was just a never ending series against the Mavs of him snaking the pick and roll and just going left, getting the guy on his back, getting to the right elbow, and just the center can't get close enough to do anything. And just making 12-footers.
I know he's only like 4 games or whatever it is into his return, but we're going to have a conversation about Kristaps Porzingis pretty soon, I think, if he doesn't perk up.
Yeah, I'm so hesitant. So Luka, I put Luka in this tier also, since we're talking Mavericks, just sort of in reference to that. But the whole Mavs thing, I don't want to. Porzingis, like you said, few games back, looks bad. It's very scary to be that tall and have multiple knee operations. Like, that's concerning. Everything about the Mavs feels concerning, but they've had the hardest luck. I mean, everybody's had a rough go, but the COVID stuff has hit them as hard as anybody. Luka was out of shape when he came in. His body language really sucks this year. He's been like really just a negative influence, I think, in a lot of ways, like towards teammates, on himself. He's complaining all the time. It's just like a real bad look. But at the same time, I just don't want to put so much stock in this weird season. But if I just emotionally, it's like I'm concerned that Luka is not the kind of player I thought he would be at this stage. Based on last year and the year before, I put him in this anyway because even in a terrible year, his numbers look really good. And I think if he gets into shape and the Mavs get everybody healthy and get a rhythm, like, he might just go back to being 32, 10, and 10 for the rest of the year, which will get him into the conversation for MVP at the end of the year. But it's been rough so far. He's just a total legacy pick for me to be included at all.
I actually did not have him listed. I probably should have, because he has the numbers. My thing with him is I don't want to say it's similar to Giannis in that, if Giannis is going to do certain things, like take those threes or those pull-ups, or if you even want to waste time like posting him up, like he needs to hit those at like a better clip than he is this season. I know there's more to Doncic's three-point shooting than his percentage. I've been a big advocate for that. The level of difficulty matters because of how it opens up, not just things for everybody else, but the rest of his game, for what he's able to do inside the arc because of where he's at threat level. But if you're going to take so many step-back three-pointers, or step-back jumpers in general, doesn't there come a time where you need to hit? He's at 30.6% on step-back threes this year. Doesn't there come a time where you need to hit a higher percentage of them than he is right now? And maybe he's not there yet because this is only year 3. But the other thing that's a part of it, and look, I think there's roster flaws around him. They still just don't have that shot creator. And I don't know that they've been the worst three-point shooting team in the league so far this year. Steph Curry definitely would have helped that. I don't know how much he helps like your off the dribble creation. He doesn't even have to do. He does even less of that in Philly now. But you look at just their shooting spreads in crunch time. More than half of their looks in crunch time this year have come from 3-point range. And surprise, surprise, they're not shooting well on those. And so it's just, he's part of that because I think that's his crutch still. I don't know how much of that is on him. I don't know how much it is on the Mavericks. But if that's going to be a staple for you, and I'm open to this being an unfair take, and this is someone who's in year 3. So let me also, clarify that. But I kind of think at some point, if that's going to be your MO, you need to be more efficient than while you're doing it. Maybe he's still so efficient inside the arc that it doesn't matter, and his game isn't. I think he's better at finishing through contact than he was, definitely as a rookie.
Oh yeah.
But I think his shot profile, definitely in crunch time too, like that is part of why they've struggled during those points. But again, I don't know how much of that is to blame on the roster and how much of that is to blame on a small sample. But my one argument would be, if you're going to take so many step back threes, I think there comes a point where you probably need to hit more of them.
I agree. I think the Giannis parallel is really interesting because he, I think, has created a similar sense of like, well, everything is possible for him because of the numbers he put up as a 20-year-old and even as a 19-year-old. That, like you say, maybe at some point it's not realistic to expect him to be a 40% three-point shooter on like a reasonable volume, because he's just going to take these bad shots and you just can't get good at these bad shots. So you have to take fewer of them, which actually, to his credit, he's taking more long twos this year, which I don't know if anyone's ever said to his credit he's taking more long twos, but he's a really good 2-point jump shooter. So if that's his way of dealing, of adjusting somehow, I don't know. Like his effective field goal percentage is 51.3. It's 53.1 last year. So it's even with just really his threes not falling, he's still just fine. But yeah, I don't know. I think
he's also shooting I think he's 43 of 78 on floaters. I'll punch that in. Okay, like 55.1%. It's like there's that element there for him too.
Yeah. Also, he's tied for sixth in Raptor wins above replacement. He's had what for him is a dog shit season, and he's by some metrics, almost a top 5 guy.
I do find it interesting that he's not in Basketball Reference's MVP tracker. In the top 10, as I mean. Yeah. So
I mean, the team is I don't know what Basketball Reference factors in, but like. We're talking about him I'm talking about him as an afterthought. You didn't put him on your list, so I think that
I would add him now though, because I think although I don't know if I'm being colored by the fact that he was the betting favorite this year. I did not pick him, by the way. Did you?
I probably did. I don't remember.
We did predictions for work. I had Jason Tatum. I think I was getting a little too trendy there.
Well,
ended up being a better pick than Luka Doncic as of 20 games into this season, though. Just an FYI.
No, do you have anybody else? I already threw Bam out there. Just like he makes mid-rangers now, which is great, and he's an awesome passer and defender. But the Heat are terrible, and that's not all his fault by any stretch. But not a realistic MVP for me right now.
I mean, if we wanted to get this, would be super into the weeds, but we probably need to shout out Nikola Vucevic.
Oh wow! Best year of his career, right? By a lot of the metrics so far.
Right. Yeah. So I graded. Or I ranked the best shooters in the league to date so far, and I just it was purely statistical. It was just measuring how much value they've added from mid-range on corner threes and above the break threes. He graded out, I think, as the 6th most valuable shooter in the league this year because he's shooting 43.3% from three. He's hitting his mid-rangers. He's done a ton from above the break, and he's just, steady. He shouldn't belong in this conversation. The Magic are bad, and I don't even know if I did not check this. I don't know if they even want winning the minutes that he's on the court. But he's just that team is not good. Their offense is really clumpy, and the fact that he still continues to be so efficient in it offensively, just probably underrated. It's this weird thing where he's been so good this year, but would you be able to trade him? Just because of the way the market is with it. You would be able to trade him. I don't want to say he's immovable. What would you get for him if you just decided to trade him? And so my guess is this has a lot to do with the lineups he's played in, but they're actually worse. Their net rating is in the 9th percentile when he's on the court, and it's better when he's off the court. I'm just shouting him out because he's having a fantastic offensive season.
He's shooting 6.1 threes a game. I mean, that's and making 2.6. I'm sure that having done this a million times, sorting stats like this, I would be willing to bet that if you sorted how many guys in the last whatever in the 3-point era at Vucevic's height have shot 6 threes a game and made 43%, it would be him and Karl Anthony Towns, and that would be it. That would be the list. Someone will look this up, but I mean that's always the guy that comes back. So anytime you're in that category, you're doing something pretty cool. But it's also he's getting to the foul line twice a game. How do you possibly do that? How do you do that playing that many minutes, having the ball that much? It's incredible.
I mean, you take a bunch of jumpers
and you make them all, I guess. Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's see. I think that's the extent. Oh, I put James Harden on here, but in bold letters, I said you can't be on the short list when you quit on a team. So that's the beginning and end of the conversation for him.
He was Vooch graded for me as the 8th most valuable shooter. He has been shooting 44% on his above the break 3-pointers.
That's just wild.
That is absolutely bonkers. I don't know if there's anyone else I would add here. There'd be a different exercise. Vooch made me think of this, the MVPs. If we didn't care about team record at all, would there Bradley Beal might be a perfect case study for that. Whereas how bad are the Wizards if you rip Bradley Beal off of them right now?
How much worse can a team be? Is really would they have 0 wins? I don't know. Maybe they would just win because it's guaranteed they lose if he gets 40. That's a fact. So if you take that out of there, maybe they just win. I don't know. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would be on there too. He's had a great year. I will say, at the beginning of the year, I thought there was a chance at the very beginning which feels like forever ago, I thought there was a chance that Trae Young would work his way into the periphery of this discussion, if not the meat and potatoes of it. That has not worked out. He's playing better than he was during that stretch, but he was like disappointing for a while with the way that he was shooting. His floaters weren't falling, his threes weren't hitting, and Atlanta just has been, they've been banged up this year too. They're still sixth in the East, which I guess is impressive, even though that means they're one game under 500. But I thought he was going to have more of a stake in this discussion.
Should we have talked about Chris Middleton at all? The king of being overlooked, basically.
I'm definitely open to talking. Hey, look, you're talking about number one crunch time option on the Bucks, Chris Middleton.
Right, on a team that a lot of people think is going to get to the finals. I mean, I don't know. Like, he definitely is the guy that you want to have the ball. Like, look, okay, so the 50, 40, 90 thing, also, sidebar, I feel like there's way too many guys that are flirting with 50, 40, 90 this year. I feel like when I'm writing, I come across a handful of those. That's not always how it's been. Anyway, Middleton, 51.7 from the field, 45.8 from deep, 92.2 from the foul line, career high 21.2 points, career high 6 assists per game.
Doesn't that feel low? I mean, the assists feel high, but I thought he was averaging more until you just said what he actually was averaging. It was like 20.7 points or whatever it is. I feel like it should be higher.
I agree it should be higher because, like, here's a new thing. It's kind of like how I feel like it's such an old head, thing to say. Like, well, if a guy was 7 of 9 from the field, why the hell wasn't he, 14 of 30? Like, if you're that hot, keep shooting. It's which is a stupid old school kind of way to think. But like, if you're shooting 50, 51, 45, 92. Let's get him some looks. Let's knock those down to like, 48 of 41 because he's just taking more shots, and let's get a little more volume. I don't know. I think, look, if we're going to talk about, we should have included him at least in the honorable mentions.
Well, we're still rounding those out. I don't know if I should bounce Vooch from that just because of how bad the Magic are, but he's having a hell of a year. But he would be, look, he's averaging more potential assists per game than Donovan Mitchell. 9.2 potential assists. Donovan Mitchell's at 9.1. He's probably averaging more assists than Donovan Mitchell, too, to be honest with you. Donovan Mitchell's like forever in the 4 to 5 range. I don't know the exact numbers there.
No, 6 assists is ridiculous. 50. Here's a new one: 50, 40, 90, and 6 assists. Like, who's done that? I don't have anybody else. I was just looking through like some of the catch-alls, and there was Middleton way up there high again, and we didn't talk.
Do you think there's a chance
Donovan Mitchell 4.6 assists per game for Mitchell, which is a career high this year?
Do you think there's a chance that James Harden can work his way higher up? Because we didn't even really mention him. You said like he would be in your honorable mentions, and he's like, it says a lot that his numbers with the Nets are kind of just like, oh, he's averaging 24 points and 12 assists per game, like whatever. If this keeps up, I mean, he's averaging 40 minutes per game, by the way, since he went to the Nets. There's probably a chance that he would finish in top 5 still.
I think so. I mean, the main thing against him, which is, unfair, and it's like he really did quit on the Rockets. That's a bad look, but that shouldn't, I mean, if we're being totally objective and serious about this, that shouldn't matter. And I do think so. I had to work the Clippers Nets last night, and it was a really good defensive performance for the Nets relative to what they've done. And Harden had a lot to do with it because Kawhi tried to bully him in the mid-range, tried to post him up a few times. You just can't post Harden up. And if they're going to switch everything and sort of invite isolation attacks, Harden's going to hold up. It's when he's trying to get through screens. That's why every team he's been on for the last 7-8 years has switched, because he just doesn't work hard to get through screens. But if he's in a one-on-one matchup, he's an able defender. Like, the closer he is to the basket, the tougher he is to score on. So if in addition to just continuing to go 24 and 12 and shoot efficiently, he can be like not a 0 defensively, then I think you have to put, I don't know what tier you put him in. You put him right back up there, with.
I mean, if he's going to pass like this, just because of how instrumental that becomes to sort of balancing everyone's touches, I would say there's a chance that he could finish above Durant then in voting.
Yeah. I think part of it, if we're just talking about like the, voting and narratives and possible outcomes, I think there would be a pathway for him, because I think a lot, at least me, and I think a lot of other people too, kind of thought that like there's no going back for him in terms of style of play. Like, he's just, the way that he played with the Rockets is just not curable. but I think a lot of people will be enthused and like encouraged if he just is an awesome point guard again and plays like actual basketball.
And he said, I know some people don't like to read into this, but he said all the right things. Like ever since the trade to Brooklyn, he's been like, I don't care about points. I just want to win, and I'm going to try and set up my teammates. And like there's a ton of value in that because everyone has to make concessions in that dynamic. And still long term, I think it's fragile in the sense that someone has to be the number one option or someone's going to get the KD treatment like it was in Golden State, except it's trickles down a little further because I think 1-2 is a little bit easier there than or maybe it'll be the same dynamic where it's like, oh, Kevin Durant is more important or James Harden is more important than Kevin Durant, whatever it ends up being. Long term, maybe that's something to watch, but for him to just say, I'm going to be the de facto point guard for most of the stints and for this team, like that's absolutely huge. And look, if he's going to lead the league in assists, that's a huge boon unto itself right there.
Well, the other thing for him is, at least right now, Steve Nash is using him without Irving or Durant as like against second units, and he was just eating last night. And if you're going to get James Harden and like I don't care who else is out there with him against backups, like he's gonna have a field day. So he's gonna still get to do his Harden stuff and pile up numbers that way, and then fit into a 3-star system when he plays the starters. I think there definitely is a pathway for his numbers and his impact to just really
that makes a ton of sense to stagger him that way because I think one, he's best suited to play by himself just because of the passer that he is and how much he dominates the ball, and then also because of how much he's dominated the ball over the past few years. Like you maybe don't necessarily want him logging the heheaviest minutes next to Kyrie. I mean, look, it's clearly working on offense. The defense is a different question. So that like there's no question there. But I think he's the player whose case could change most rapidly in either direction, I think, of anyone we've discussed on this list. I'm trying to think of, is there anyone at the top you could kind of see falling that we mentioned, maybe within like that top 5?
I mean, it's just if Embiid misses games, which is a cop-out, same with Leonard if he gets back into more of a rest protocol. But other than that, I mean, like, I think Jokic is going to put these numbers up all year. And I think the Nuggets defense can only get better, I would assume. LeBron, I don't think is going anywhere. We're not going to ever predict, tail off until it happens. I'm not going to predict it ever again. Yeah, I don't know. I think Harden has a lot of upward mobility. The downward mobility from the top, 3, 4, 5 guys is kind of hard to see, barring injury, which is like that's true for everybody,
Right. I guess maybe you can make the case for Durant just because if like how much does he? But he's just been so good this year. I'm going to retract that. It's probably Embiid because of the availability, or if LeBron decides to take like a mid-season hiatus because he wants to be fresh for the postseason or something. I don't know.
Giannis could get up there again. I mean, it has to register as a surprise or disappointment that he's as far down as he was for us. I think if he just becomes what he was last year, then he gets into the top 5 discussion again pretty easy.
That's what I dislike about these exercises too, is because then you have to zero in on what we don't like about a player, or you end up invariably focusing on the imperfections. And it's like Giannis is still one of the 5 to 10 best players in the league.
Right. Like no question. It's not a debate.
Although I think he was consensus best player in the league entering last year and through most of last year. Who is the best? I had LeBron. Bleacher Report, you participated in those rankings. We had LeBron James ended up being ranked as number 1. Who's been the best player in the league this year?
That's what I gave LeBron the MVP for that reason. I mean, the numbers, he needs help with the numbers in some areas, but I just think he's the best player. He has the most control over the game. I'm just reiterating my case. I just think it's him. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else to say it.
I'm just not going to answer because I feel like if I pick LeBron, then why didn't I pick him to win MVP? I think you might be able to make the case that it's Jokic too. But then why wouldn't he win MVP? Best player versus MVP is a tough debate. That's for a different podcast, though. Do you have anything else to add on this? Julius Randle, did we want to mention him at all?
I got my Andrew Wiggins plug in there, so I'm happy.
Yes, Andrew Wiggins is going to rank in the top 250 of MVP voting this year. Rest assured.
Easy.
Folks, if you're not following Grant on Twitter, remedy that post-haste at GT_Hughes. Please, pretty please, rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes, whether or not you use it. Just search Hardwood Knocks, throw us that 5-star rating, write a review, always appreciate it. And also just make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcast and download every single episode. Until next time, I'll leave you with the shout out to the one, the only, belongs in the peripherals of the MVP discussion, apparently, according to Grant Hughes. Mike Conley,